All right, and continuing our vector project, right? Our last video, saving our black shape vector in Illustrator and bringing into Photoshop. That is where we're going to pick it up with this new class period. And I got to find my stuff and organize it. Now I'm going to repeat those steps. And I want to be clear about the different vector formats and why they're important. So let's open up assignment 4. And I'm going to open my working format for a vector. And the working format for a vector, this is the file we make changes to. I mark working formats as green. So far, we've always done PSDs as working formats because we've been doing raster programs or raster files. So it's going to be the AI. So I'm going to double click on the AI and it will automatically open in Adobe Illustrator. This is the one I'm doing in the other class. All right, so this was our final vector solution. Now remember, you can have the layers in Illustrator. The layers are not really layers. They are groupings for the individual vector shapes. So each fill path is its own listing underneath your layer organizations. And then within the layers, you can have kind of asset groups as well, or fill groups. And that lets you pathfind them, like merge them, combine them, work with them all together. So that's what I have, right? This is a great way to look at variations on your logo. So for instance, if I showed the client this and they say, I like it, but it's a little too complicated, I could say, well, what about this? So you always have control of every individual vector. And of course, they are all perfectly clean at any size. So they can be rendered to any scale and rasterized to any scale, whether it's a billboard, the side of a building, or a postage stamp, right? So once you have this, there's a few things you're supposed to check before you send it on to the client, before you use it in other ways. And one of those things for graphic symbols or logos is you want to make sure there are no strokes involved at all. So to do that, you're going to use your large selection tool. You have everything turned on that you think you need, right? So the only things I need are all on this top layer here. And then you're just going to draw a big box around it with your large selection tool that will select every vector. If you want to see all the anchor points, you can use the small selection tool after that just to see all those anchor points. And what you want is this. When they are all selected, you see no stroke. All right? And you only see a single black fill. This is also the way in which you can standardize the coloring of everything. So from that black shape vector, I can make any color vector I want, right? But we're not doing that right now. We're just making a really clean black shape. So the stroke should be empty. What happens if the stroke is not empty, right? Then you need, or if it says like question mark here, because that means some of them have strokes, some of them don't. That means you have to go through your vector assets and check each one. And whenever they show up with a stroke, you have to turn that off, right? By clicking on it and then saying the none button, the none icon. So for instance, if this shape had a stroke, I'll just turn a stroke on. I'll make it red so you can see it clearly. I'll turn the properties up so it make it really big so you can see what that stroke does. Like that might be an interesting variation for later, but for right now, we just want the black shapes. So if I see that and I select all of it, because I think I'm done with my black shape vector, see how it's going to give me question marks where the stroke is. They're little tiny question marks in the corner, which means not all of them are free of strokes, and that's a problem. So what do I need to do? I need to go through each one and see, oh, that's the one with the stroke. And then I just have to say no stroke. Stroke prevention, it's important for the health of your graphics. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is, and you can really do this in either order, I'm going to select the whole thing, again, with the large selection tool. Keeping the large selection tool, I'm going to zoom out, Command minus, and I'm just going to move it onto the gray. So the gray shows me if there are any white paths accidentally left in there. You'll also see white paths as just a white box. It'll also show me if there's any kind of discolored paths. And so what you want to do is select them all and make sure they're all the same black. And we want the deep black, the one in the very bottom left-hand corner. Now this is actually not the darkest black your computer can do. This is what's called CMYK black, because the defaults for Illustrator are for printing, for whatever reason, because they're used for eventual print jobs. And we're going to learn the difference between CMYK black and RGB black a little bit later, but you make it as black as you can at this point, using the defaults. We're not going to change the defaults. Okay, notice I don't have any white shapes at all. So what if I did have white shapes? Well, I would need to find them, delete them. If they are white shapes that are creating, this is review, but if there are white shapes creating kind of cutouts that I need, like if I have something there, so when I see it, I'm just trying to be really, really clear so you understand vectors. So when I see it as I'm building it, what's the difference between something that I appropriately cut out with either the eraser tool or the Pathfinder tool and something I forgot to cut out? It's really hard to tell. That's why it's helpful to select it all and push it off to the gray. That's why the gray is there outside of the artboard. So then when you see that, what do you do? Well, if you want it to be cut out, you have to see what is it overlapping. And I have to find that exact group, that exact path. It's this one. And then I have to find the white itself, which is going to be kind of that empty path there. Not empty, but white on white. I hold Command to select them both. Now they're both overlapping each other and selected, and I use the Pathfinder tool, which can be found under Window if you don't have it visible already. And then I minus, right? And that kind of punches it out. So all of that's very helpful. Once you've done all those things, we are ready to save it. So you say File, and we're going to say Save As, just to make sure you put your name in there. Always put your name so we can find your work, especially as we're going to be printing these. And then you want assignment 4 and some sort of description, right? And I'm going to save it to my assignment 4. I would recommend you guys save it to the desktop, which you can do by hitting Command D. So that's the first way you save it. So I'll actually save it to the desktop right now, because all of this is just a repeat of things I've already saved into my folder. Now that is your working format. So you find that, you mark that green. Any alterations you want to make, you do it through the Illustrator file. That's kind of your master file. Now we need what are called transferable vector formats. Vector formats do not lose quality, but they organize data differently. And because they organize the data differently, they can only be opened by certain programs. AI files, Adobe Illustrator files, can only be opened by Adobe Illustrator. So they are not a great file to send to a client, especially a client that doesn't have their own graphics department, right? So what you need is a transferable file format, and there are two which are very commonly used that I require you to know. The first is the one that's really commonly used with Adobe software. It works outside of that as well. It's my favorite transferable vector format. It's what I always send clients, but it works particularly with Adobe software, and that is the EPS file. So when you go to save, you can do save a copy or save as, but instead of the AI format, the Adobe Illustrator format, you're going to click on the drop down and you're going to choose the Illustrator EPS format. Now the Illustrator EPS format, save it to the desktop, I hit save, keep all the defaults, which includes the CMYK postscript. Just keep that in there. And then we're going to mark this one purple. But I do purple because it's actually like violet and V for vector, right? So we do orange for online, we do violet for vector, we do green for working formats, because green is where you would start to make changes. Now you'll notice there is no preview on the Mac operating system. There used to be, but there isn't anymore for EPS. I'm not sure why. And it's to try to get people to realize EPSs are kind of dangerous files. Because if you just double click that, it won't open in Adobe Illustrator. It will, if it will open at all. There we go. It will ask you to rasterize it. So you don't want that, right? That just undoes everything you did with your vector. So that is why I think they've changed it to where there is no longer a preview of it, which is a shame because the previews looked really good. All right. The next thing we're going to save it as out of Illustrator is as the oldest type of vector format, and that is an SVG. So I say save a copy, same name to the desktop. An SVG stands for Scalable Vector Graphic. We don't want the compressed version. We just want the regular SVG because vectors are pretty small in memory anyway. It would only be a really complicated vector. We might need the compressed format. And we say, okay, we keep all the defaults again. And look how that preview icon looks very different. And I'm going to mark that purple. So what SVG does is it saves all the data, but it limits it to what's on this white artboard. That's why we need to put it on the white. The white is for printing out of Illustrator, but most people never print out of Illustrator, right? Instead, the artboard is the only data that the SVG will recognize. So always keep all of your design on the white artboard. And there's ways to increase the artboard too. We can, make that any shape we need. But you can also shrink or enlarge your vector to any size you want with the large selection tool. It won't hurt any of the anchor points or the quality, especially if you don't have strokes turned on. All right. So why is it showing so much? Well, because it's showing all of that, like all these different things I did. And remember, I did a positive and an inverted version. So even though the layers are turned off or locked, in the SVG, they just all show. Okay. And then what I do is I lock everything for the client. I lock the things that I have turned off. I lock the things that are turned on. So there's just no issue. Even if they open up the EPS that I send them in Illustrator, they know exactly what's intended. But I will show you how we actually use that EPS now. Yeah.
When you send that to the client, would they be able to unlock it on their end if they open it in Illustrator?
So I always send instructions. Oh yes, if they open it in Illustrator, they'd be able to unlock and modify, anything that's needed. But I also send instructions because most of the time, if they're hiring you to do imagery, you are not sending it to someone that then knows how to use Illustrator.
Right.
So what you do is you have to not only say this is a vector file and tell them not to rasterize it, tell them not just to double click it, You're going to tell them to give it to your print department, give it to your graphics, there's usually a print vendor, and you're the designer. That's my situation usually. So you just don't want them to mess it up along the way.
Right.
So I'll also send them JPEG mock-ups and things so they can see what's going on, but the EPS is like the one that doesn't have a preview icon. It's like the master key to get the very best t-shirt, the very best ad, the very best, poster, whatever it might be. Okay, so now with that EPS, this is now on the print side, right? And we are going to make this vector print ready. So we're like the client now using what we designed to do a poster print, right? Or even just a web icon. So